They threw her out into the freezing rain with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and a broken heart. Mark Vance looked his wife of 10 years in the eye and told her she was worthless, while his mistress laughed from the warmth of the living room. His mother Agnes called her a parasite. They thought they had finally discarded the trash, but what Mark, his mother, and his pregnant mistress didn't know was that exactly 3 minutes before they kicked her out, a phone call had changed everything. The woman shivering on their porch wasn't just Elara Vance, the unemployed housewife, anymore. She was now the sole heiress to the Harrington global empire worth $12 billion. And she was about to buy the very ground they walked on. This is the story of how the ultimate betrayal led to the ultimate revenge. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times, the sound echoing through the cold, expansive hallway of the Vance family estate. Elara adjusted the collar of her modest beige dress, a dress she had worn for 3 years straight, and checked the roast in the oven. It was perfectly cooked. The potatoes were roasted with rosemary, just the way Mark liked them. The wine, a vintage 2015 Cabernet that she had saved up from her small grocery allowance to buy, was breathing on the counter. Today was their 5th wedding anniversary. For most couples, this is a milestone of love and partnership. For Elara, it felt like a performance review. She was destined to fail. "Is the table set, Elara?" The sharp, grating voice of Agnes Vance, her mother-in-law, sliced through the air. Agnes walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. She scanned the room with eyes that missed nothing and forgave even less. "Yes, Mother," Elara said softly, wiping her hands on her apron. "I've prepared Mark's favorites." Agnes scoffed, picking up a silver spoon and inspecting it for spots. Mark's favorites. Mark's favorite thing would be a wife who actually contributes to this family's legacy, not a mute mouse who drains his wallet. Elara bit her lip. "I try my best, Mother. I take care of the house You take care of a house we pay for," Agnes snapped, slamming the spoon down. 5 years, Elara. 5 years and no promotion for Mark because he's distracted by your incompetence at home. 5 years and, more importantly, no heir. You are a barren field, my dear. A bad investment. Elara looked down at her feet. It was the same argument every day. Mark worked as a mid-level executive at Vance & Co., a logistics firm started by his father, but run with an iron fist by the board since his father's passing. They weren't billionaires, but they were wealthy, arrogant, and obsessed with status. Elara, an orphan who had worked as a librarian before meeting Mark, had never fit their mold. "He'll be home soon," Agnes warned. "Don't bore him. At 7:15 p.m., the front door opened. Elara's heart fluttered. She untied her apron, smoothed her hair, and walked to the foyer with a smile. "Happy anniversary, Mark," she said, her voice filled with a fragile hope. Mark Vance stood in the doorway. He was a handsome man with a sharp jawline and expensive suits, but his eyes had grown cold over the years. He didn't smile back. He didn't even look at her. He was shaking off his umbrella, looking agitated. But he wasn't alone. Standing behind him, wrapped in a white faux fur coat that looked brand new, was Jessica. Jessica was Mark's executive assistant. She was 24, vibrant, and looked at Elara with a thinly veiled smirk. "Mark?" Elara asked, confusion clouding her mind. I made dinner for 2. "We're not eating," Mark said flatly, walking past her into the living room. Jessica followed her heels, clicking a rhythm of invasion. Agnes emerged from the dining room, her face lighting up when she saw the guest. "Jessica, oh, how wonderful to see you. You look glowing." "Thank you, Agnes," Jessica cooed, placing a hand protectively over her stomach. "I feel wonderful." Elara stood frozen in the hallway. The air suddenly felt very thin. "Mark, what is going on?" Mark turned around. He looked tired of her. Not angry, just bored. "Elara, sit down. We need to talk." "I don't want to sit," Elara said, her voice trembling. "Why is your assistant here on our anniversary?" "Because," Jessica interjected, stepping forward and linking her arm through Mark's. "I'm not just his assistant anymore, sweetie. And this isn't really an anniversary celebration. It's a transition meeting." "A transition?" Elara whispered. Mark sighed, pulling a thick envelope from his inner jacket pocket. He tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "These are divorce papers, Elara," Mark said. "I've already signed them. You just need to sign and you can leave." The room spun. "Divorce, Mark, we promised, through sickness and health. I love you. Love doesn't pay the bills, and it certainly doesn't secure the family line." Agnes spat from the corner, pouring herself a glass of the wine Elara had bought. "Jessica is pregnant, Elara. She's giving Mark a son, a real heir. Something you couldn't do." Elara looked at Jessica's stomach, then at Mark's face. He wasn't denying it. He looked proud. "It's a boy," Mark said, a cruelty in his voice that Elara had never heard before. "We found out yesterday. Jessica and I have been together for a year, Elara. I was waiting for the right time to tell you, but frankly, I'm tired of waiting. I want my family to start. My real family." A year. Elara felt tears streaming down her face, hot and stinging. "You've been lying to me for a year. I wash your clothes. I cook your meals. I wait up for you when you say you're working late. And that's all you're good for." Jessica laughed. "You're a glorified maid, Elara. Look at you. Look at. That dress is pathetic. You have no style, no ambition, and no family name. Mark needs a power couple image. I can give him that." "The severance package is generous," Mark said, gesturing to the envelope. $10,000. Enough to get you an apartment in the bad part of town, and maybe some vocational training. It's more than you deserve." $10,000? Elara choked out. "I gave you 5 years of my life, and they were 5 boring years," Agnes muttered. "Get her out of here, Mark. The air is getting stale." "You have 10 minutes to pack your things," Mark commanded, checking his Rolex. "Jessica and I have reservations at Le Monde at 8. I want you gone before we leave." "Mark, please," Elara begged, reaching for his hand. He recoiled as if she were diseased. "Don't touch him," Jessica shrieked. "Get out. Go back to the gutter you crawled out of." Elara looked at the 3 of them. The husband she adored, the mother-in-law she tried to please, and the woman who stole her life. There was no remorse in their eyes, only contempt. She turned around, her heart shattering into a million pieces, and walked up the stairs. She didn't take the suitcase. She grabbed a black garbage bag. She threw in her few clothes, her toothbrush, and a photo of her parents who had died when she was a child. As she zipped her old coat and walked back down the stairs, she heard them laughing in the living room. They were already toasting to her departure. She opened the front door. It was pouring rain. A storm had broken over the city thunder, rattling the window panes. "Leave the keys," Mark shouted from the living room, "and don't come back begging when that 10 grand runs out." Elara dropped the keys on the floor. She stepped out into the freezing rain, the heavy oak door slamming shut behind her. The click of the lock was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She walked down the long driveway, the rain soaking her instantly. She had nowhere to go. No family. No friends. Mark had isolated her from everyone. She was alone in the dark. But then she felt a vibration in her pocket. It was her cracked smartphone. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Who would be calling her now? But something, an instinct, a pull, made her swipe the wet screen. "Hello," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Is this Elara Vance Nee? Elara Sterling?" A deep, professional voice asked. "Yes," she said, shivering. "Who is this?" "My name is Arthur Pendergast, Senior Partner at Pendergast and Moore," the voice said. "I have been trying to reach you for 3 days, Mrs. Vance. It is regarding your great-uncle, Silas Harrington." I don't know a Silas Harrington," Elara stammered. "I don't have any family." "You did," Arthur said gravely. "Silas Harrington was the founder of the Harrington Global Corporation. He was your grandmother's estranged brother. He passed away 4 days ago. He had no children. He had been watching you for years, Elara. He knew about your situation." Elara stopped walking. The rain pelted her face, but she didn't feel the cold anymore. "Watching me? He left everything to you, Elara," Arthur continued. "The real estate, the tech holdings, the shipping fleet, and the liquid assets. We need to meet immediately to sign the transfer of power." "Everything?" Elara asked, her legs feeling weak. "How much is everything?" There was a pause on the line. "The current valuation of the estate," Arthur said calmly, "is $12.5 billion. Elara dropped the garbage bag. She turned around and looked at the house she had just been kicked out of. The lights were warm and golden. She could see Mark and Jessica silhouetted in the window laughing. They were celebrating a victory over a woman they thought was a pauper. "Miss Pendergast," Elara said, her voice suddenly steady, the tears washing away in the rain. "Where are you?" "I am in a limousine parked at the end of your street," Arthur replied. "I've been waiting for you to leave that house." Elara saw the headlights flicker on in the distance. "I'm coming," she said. The interior of the limousine was warmer than any room in the Vance estate had ever been. It smelled of rich leather and expensive cologne. Sitting across from Elara was Arthur Pendergast, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He held out a towel. "Dry yourself, Ms. Sterling," he said gently. "I believe you'll be using your maiden name from now on." Elara took the towel, dabbing her face. $12 billion, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Is this a joke? Is Mark playing some cruel prank?" Arthur opened a leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "I assure you this is no prank. Silas Harrington was a very private man. He built his empire in the shadows. He fell out with your family decades ago, but kept tabs on your bloodline. He saw how you cared for your parents before they passed. He saw how you served that ungrateful husband of yours. In his will, he wrote, 'To the one who serves with a pure heart, I give the sword to conquer those who have none.'" Arthur handed her a black debit card. It was heavy, made of metal. It had no numbers on it, just a gold chip, and her name, Elara Sterling. "This is the black card for the Harrington Trust," Arthur explained. "It has a daily spending limit of $5 million. The main accounts are unrestricted." Elara stared at the card. 5 minutes ago, she was worried about how to afford a motel room. Now she could buy the motel chain. "Why didn't he help me sooner?" Elara asked, a flash of anger mixing with her shock. "Why let me suffer? He wanted to be sure. Arthur said. He wanted to see if the corruption of that family would taint you. It didn't. You walked out with your dignity, not their money. That was the final test. Arthur tapped the partition window. Driver, take us to the penthouse at the Ritz-Carlton. Miss Sterling needs rest. No, Elara said suddenly. Arthur raised an eyebrow. No. Elara looked out the tinted window. They were driving past the Vance & Co. headquarters, a modest 10-story building in the business district. Mark was so proud of that building. He worshipped it. I don't want to rest, Elara said, her eyes hardening. The image of Jessica's hand on her stomach and Agnes's cruel laughter played in her mind like a looped video. I want to work. It is 9:00 p.m. on a Friday, Arthur noted. I want to know everything about Vance & Co., Elara said. I want to know who owns their debt. I want to know who their biggest clients are. And I want to know who owns the lease on their building. Arthur smiled. It was a slow, predatory smile. He pulled out a tablet. Silas would have loved this. Vance & Co. is a mid-sized logistics firm. They are currently leveraged to the hilt, trying to expand into the Asian market. Their primary lender is North Trust Bank. Do we own North Trust? Elara asked. We own the holding company that owns the insurance firm that insures North Trust, Arthur said. So effectively, yes. We can call in their loans tomorrow morning. Not yet, Elara said, clutching the towel. If I destroy them now, they'll know it's me. Or they'll just declare bankruptcy and move on. I don't want them to just lose money, Arthur. I want them to lose their pride. I want them to feel what I felt. What do you propose? Jessica mentioned a power couple image, Elara mused. Mark is desperate for a promotion to CEO. The current board is shaky. Correct, Arthur said, typing rapidly. The annual shareholders' gala is in 2 weeks. Mark Vance is expected to make a bid for the CEO position then. 2 weeks, Elara whispered. That's enough time. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass. She saw a tired, wet, pale woman. That woman had to die so Elara Sterling could live. Arthur, she said, I need a team. Stylists, business coaches, speech therapists. I need to know how to walk into a room and make everyone stop breathing. Can you arrange that? Consider it done, Arthur said. Where shall we go first? Take me to the Ritz, Elara said. But tomorrow we go shopping. I have a wardrobe to replace, and I believe Jessica said I have no style. I intend to correct that. The next morning, Elara woke up in a bed that was larger than her entire bedroom at the Vance house. The sheets were Egyptian cotton. Breakfast had been wheeled in fresh fruit pastries and coffee that tasted like heaven. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling mirror. She looked at her body. She was thin from stress, her hair limp. At 10:00 a.m., the team arrived. First was Paolo, a stylist who had worked with royalty in Europe. He didn't speak. He just circled her, tutting and nodding. We cut, he said, grabbing a lock of her long, dull brown hair. We color. Honey and gold. Sharp lines. You are not a housewife, darling. You are a queen. Next was Sarah, a high-powered executive coach. Stand up straight, she commanded. Shoulders back. When you speak, you don't ask for permission. You state facts. Mark interrupted you. You stop speaking until he finishes. Stare him in the eye for 3 seconds, and then continue as if he never spoke. Silence is power. For the next 10 days, Elara didn't sleep much. She read financial reports. She learned the intricacies of the logistics market. She memorized the names of every board member at Vance & Co. She also spent money. She walked into Chanel on 5th Avenue, wearing jeans and a hoodie. The salesgirl ignored her. Elara pulled out the black card. "I want the fall collection," Elara said. "Which piece?" the girl asked, eyeing the card nervously. "The collection," Elara corrected, "and I need it tailored by this evening." She bought a penthouse overlooking Central Park, not to live in, but just because it was directly across from the restaurant where Mark liked to take clients. She wanted to look down on him. On the 11th day, Arthur came to her suite. He looked pleased. "It is done," he said. "Through a shell company, Nebula Holdings, we have acquired 51% of the voting shares of Vance & Co." Elara turned from the window. She was wearing a tailored crimson power suit that cost more than Mark's car. Her hair was a sleek, wavy bob that framed her face perfectly. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting eyes that now looked dangerous. "Does Mark know?" she asked. "No," Arthur said. "The purchase was made through blind trusts. The board knows there is a new majority shareholder, but they don't know who it is. They are panicking. They've called an emergency meeting at the gala." "Perfect," Elara smiled. "There is one more thing," Arthur said, hesitating. "Mark is trying to secure a massive contract with the Redwood Group to save his reputation. If he lands it, the board might keep him on regardless of the shares." "The Redwood Group?" Elara laughed softly. "Arthur, don't we own the supply chain for Redwood?" "We do." "Call the CEO of Redwood," Elara said, picking up her purse. "Tell him that Nebula Holdings has a better offer. But tell him, I want to deliver the news personally, at the gala." "You're going to the gala?" Arthur asked. "Of course," Elara said, checking her reflection one last time. "I wouldn't miss my husband's big night for the world." The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering designer gowns. This was the night Mark Vance had been waiting for his entire career. The Vance & Co. Annual Shareholders Gala. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. Mark stood near the ice sculpture centerpiece, a crystal glass of scotch in his hand. He looked every bit the successful executive, though the credit card in his pocket was near its limit, paying for the table. Beside him, Jessica beamed her hand, resting conspicuously on her small baby bump. She was wearing a white silk dress that cost 3 times what Elara's annual clothing budget used to be. "You've got this, babe," Jessica whispered, kissing his cheek. "Once you announce the Redwood partnership, the board will have no choice but to name you CEO. Then we can finally move out of your mother's house and get that mansion in the Hamptons." "It's in the bag," Mark said, scanning the room. "The Redwood CEO, Mr. Henderson, is supposed to be here. I need to find him." Agnes Vance approached them holding a glass of champagne. She looked sour. "I heard rumors, Mark. Rumors that someone has been buying up voting stock all week. Do you know anything about this?" Mark waved a dismissive hand. "Just market speculation, Mother. Probably some hedge fund trying to make a quick buck. Once I take the stage and announce the merger, the stock will skyrocket and they'll sell. It doesn't matter who they are." "I hope you're right," Agnes muttered. "We can't afford any surprises, not with the baby coming." Suddenly the chatter in the room died down. It started near the entrance, a hush that spread like a wave across the ballroom. Even the string quartet seemed to falter for a beat. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The massive double doors at the far end of the ballroom had swung open. Walking through them was a woman who looked like she had just stepped out of a high-fashion magazine and into reality. She wore a floor-length gown of deep crimson velvet that hugged every curve of her body, with a slit that revealed a tasteful amount of leg and a pair of diamond-encrusted stilettos. Her hair a cascading river of honey-gold waves caught the light of the chandeliers. Around her neck sat a diamond necklace that looked heavy enough to sink a small yacht. She didn't just walk, she glided. Flanked by 2 large security guards and a distinguished older man with silver hair, she looked like royalty visiting a peasant village. "Who is that?" Jessica asked, her voice laced with instant jealousy. I don't know," Mark said, his eyes glued to the woman. "But look at the way the board members are looking at her. That's old money. That's power." "She's walking this way," Agnes whispered, straightening her posture. "Mark, fix your tie. She might be an investor." The woman moved through the crowd, the sea of people parting for her. She didn't look at anyone. Her gaze was fixed straight ahead, locked onto the group standing by the ice sculpture. Mark put on his best charm smile. He stepped forward, extending a hand. "Good evening. I don't believe we've met. I'm Mark Vance, Executive Vice President. Welcome to our gala." The woman stopped. She looked at Mark's hand, then up at his face. Her expression was unreadable, cold, distant, and terrifyingly calm. She didn't take his hand. "We've met Mark," she said. Her voice was smooth, rich, and painfully familiar. Mark froze. He squinted, confused. The voice. He knew that voice. But the face, the hair, the aura of absolute dominance. It didn't match the image in his head. I'm sorry," Mark stammered. The woman took a step closer, invading his personal space. She smelled of jasmine and money. "You really don't recognize me?" she asked, a small, cruel smile playing on her red lips. "It's only been 12 days, darling. Did you forget me the moment you kicked me out into the rain?" Mark's eyes went wide. His glass of scotch slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound rang out like a gunshot in the silent room. "Elara," he gasped. Agnes dropped her purse. Jessica actually took a step back, clutching her pearls. "Impossible," Agnes hissed. "Elara is... she's a mouse. She's trash. You... look at you." "Hello, Mother," Elara said, turning her cold gaze to Agnes. "I see you're wearing the same pearls you told me were too good for a commoner to touch. They look a bit tacky under these lights, don't you think?" "What is going on?" Jessica screeched, her face turning red. "Mark, why is she here? Did she break in?" "Security." "I wouldn't bother calling security," Elara said calmly. "They work for the building owner. And since my holding company bought the lease on this hotel yesterday, technically they work for me." "You bought the lease?" Mark whispered, his face pale. "Elara, where did you get this money? Did you steal it? Is this some kind of scam?" Elara laughed. It wasn't the polite, nervous laugh she used to have. It was a dark, hearty laugh. "Oh, Mark, you always had such a small imagination. I didn't steal anything. I inherited my birthright. Something you were too busy cheating on me to notice." Arthur Pendergast stepped forward, holding a sleek tablet. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice projecting, so the nearby board members could hear. "My client, Ms. Sterling, formerly Mrs. Vance, is the sole beneficiary of the Harrington Global Estate. She is currently the majority shareholder of Nebula Holdings." A gasp went through the crowd. The board of directors, who had been hovering nearby, suddenly swarmed in. "Nebula Holdings, the chairman of the board!" A man named Mr. Henderson stammered. "The company that just acquired 51% of our voting stock." "The very same," Elara said, turning her back on Mark to address the chairman. Mr. Henderson, lovely to meet you. I believe you were about to let my ex-husband make a speech about a future he doesn't have. Elara, wait. Mark grabbed her arm. Elara's security guard moved instantly, grabbing Mark's wrist and twisting it until he let go with a yelp of pain. "Do not touch me," Elara said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You lost the right to touch me when you threw me out like garbage." "Elara, please," Mark said, sweating now. He saw his promotion, his reputation, and his future crumbling. "Let's talk about this privately. We're family." "Family?" Elara raised an eyebrow. "You have your family right there. Your mother and your mistress. I'm just the bad investment, remember?" She turned to the crowd, raising her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board shareholders," Elara announced, "there will be no speech from Mark Vance tonight. In fact, as the new majority owner, I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current executive vice president." "You can't do that," Jessica yelled. "He's the father of my child." "And that is the only title he will have left by the morning," Elara replied. The gala effectively ended the moment Elara finished her sentence, but the night was far from over. Elara requested the board of directors, along with Mark, Agnes, and Jessica, to convene in the private VIP conference room upstairs. The room was tense. The mahogany table seemed to stretch for miles. Elara sat at the head of the table. Arthur stood to her right. The board members sat along the sides, looking terrified. Mark, Agnes, and Jessica were huddled at the far end, looking like prisoners awaiting execution. "Let's keep this brief," Elara said, checking her diamond watch. "I have a late supper reservation." "Elara, honey." Agnes started, her voice trembling with a fake sweetness that was nauseating. "We've clearly had a misunderstanding. The stress of the business. Mark wasn't thinking straight. We love you. You know that. We took you in when you had no one." Elara stared at Agnes until the older woman looked away. "You took me in as an unpaid servant, Agnes. You criticized my cooking, my cleaning, and my existence for 5 years. Don't rewrite history just because I have a checkbook now." "We can work this out," Mark said, leaning forward. He was trying to regain his composure, relying on the arrogance that had served him for years. "Look, Elara, you own the majority shares now. Great. That makes us partners. I know the company better than anyone. Keep me as CEO. We can run this together. Think of the power couple we could be." "The story alone. There is no we," Elara cut him off. "And regarding your precious Redwood contract," Elara signaled to Arthur. He opened the door, and a tall man walked in. It was the CEO of the Redwood Group. "Mr. Henderson." Mark stood up, relieved. "Thank God. Tell her about our deal." The Redwood CEO looked at Mark with pity. "Hello, Mark. I'm afraid the deal is off." "What?" Mark slammed his hand on the table. "We shook hands." "That was before Ms. Sterling approached us," the CEO said, nodding respectfully to Elara. "Her company, Harrington Global, owns the shipping lanes we use for our exports. She offered us a 50% discount on logistics if we dropped Vance & Co. and signed exclusively with her new management team." "New management team?" Mark asked, breathless. "Yes," Elara said. "I'm restructuring Vance & Co. Effective immediately, the executive vice president role is dissolved. We are bringing in outside management." "You're firing me?" Mark's voice cracked. "From my father's company. It ceased to be your father's company when you ran it into the ground with debt to fund your lifestyle," Elara retorted. "I'm not just firing you, Mark. I'm auditing you." "Auditing, Arthur stepped forward, placing a thick file on the table. We've had forensic accountants looking at the company books for the last week. It appears there are significant irregularities. Company funds used for personal luxury cars, dinners at Le Monde, and, let's see, a very expensive apartment rental for a Ms. Jessica Tate. Jessica gasped. All eyes turned to her. Embezzlement is a serious crime, Mark, Elara said softly. The board could press charges. Or what? Mark asked, slumped in his chair. He looked broken. Or you sign over your remaining minority shares to me, resign quietly, and walk away with nothing but your freedom, Elara said. You can't leave him with nothing, Jessica cried out. We have a baby coming. We need support. He has a severance package, Elara said, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. I believe the standard rate is $10,000. That's what you offered me, right? Mark. Enough for an apartment in the bad part of town and some vocational training. Mark flinched as if he'd been slapped. The words he had used to crush her were now being used to bury him. You're a monster, Jessica spat. No, Elara corrected. I'm a businesswoman, and I'm cleaning house. Suddenly Mark stood up. His face twisted from despair into a sneer. He reached into his jacket pocket. You think you've won? Mark laughed, a manic edge to his voice. You forgot one thing, Elara. We're still married. The room went silent. We are, Elara asked, feigning innocence. I signed the divorce papers, but I never filed them. Mark grinned triumphantly. I was waiting until after the gala to avoid the bad press. That means we are legally still married. And in this state, inheritance acquired during a marriage is subject to division if it's commingled or if the judge decides it's equitable. Agnes sat up straighter. That's right. She's his wife. He's entitled to half of the billions. Jessica's eyes lit up. Half? I'll drag this out in court for years. Mark threatened, buttoning his jacket. I'll freeze your assets. I'll make your life a living hell unless you give me $5 billion and full control of this company. Elara didn't blink. She looked at Arthur. Arthur looked at his watch, looking bored. Arthur, would you like to do the honors? Elara asked. Arthur cleared his throat. Mr. Vance, you are correct that you didn't file the papers. However, you seem to forget the specific clauses within the document you drafted. What clauses? Mark demanded. The document you forced Elara to sign was a unilateral separation agreement with immediate effect, drafted by your own lawyers to ensure she couldn't claim your future assets, Arthur explained calmly. It states that the marital union is considered dissolved for financial purposes the moment both parties sign. You signed on the 14th. Elara signed on the 14th. So, Mark challenged. So, Arthur continued, Silas Harrington died on the 10th. However, the probate wasn't executed, and the transfer of funds to Ms. Sterling didn't legally occur until the morning of the 15th, at 9:00 a.m. Arthur slid a single piece of paper across the table. You were legally separated and financially severed 24 hours before she received a single dime. Arthur said, her fortune is post-separation assets. You aren't entitled to a penny. Mark picked up the paper. His hands shook so hard the paper rattled. He read it, his face turning grey. His own greed, his rush to get rid of her to be with Jessica, had cost him everything. Checkmate, Elara whispered. Mark dropped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Agnes was staring into space, realizing her son was now broke and unemployed. Elara stood up. She smoothed her red dress. Security, she called out. 2 burly guards entered the room. Please escort Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance, and Ms. Tate off the premises, Elara commanded, and strip them of their company badges. They are trespassing. Elara, please, Mark cried out as the guards grabbed him by the arms. Where are we supposed to go? Elara walked to the door, stopping just before she left. She didn't look back. It's raining outside, Mark, she said. I suggest you start walking. 3 weeks had passed since the gala. For Elara, they were weeks of board meetings, press conferences, and learning how to navigate a world where a signature could move mountains. For Mark, Agnes, and Jessica, they were weeks of hell. The rain that night at the gala had been symbolic. By the time they had walked 3 miles to the nearest subway station, because their company credit cards were declined and their personal accounts frozen pending the audit, Jessica's white dress was ruined and Mark's tuxedo was soaked through. Now the reality of their situation had set in. They were living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a run-down district of Queens. Agnes's house had been seized by the bank. It turned out Mark had convinced her to put it up as collateral for a high-risk loan to cover his gambling debts that the company funds could no longer hide. The air in the small apartment was thick with resentment. This toast is burnt, Agnes complained, sitting at a scratched laminate table. She was wearing a faded bathrobe, her hair unkempt. Mark, can't you even work a toaster? Mark was sitting on the sagging sofa staring at his laptop. He looked 10 years older. His eyes were sunken, his stubble thick. I'm trying to find a job, Mother. Stop nagging me. A job? Jessica laughed from the corner. She was painting her nails, the chemical smell filling the tiny room. You've applied to 50 places, Mark. No one will touch you. Elara made sure of that. The embezzlement investigation is the first thing that pops up when anyone Googles your name. It's not embezzlement, Mark snapped. It was creative accounting. I was going to pay it back. With what? Jessica sneered. My child's college fund. Oh, wait. We don't have that anymore. Mark slammed the laptop shut. Why are you still here, Jessica? If you hate it so much, leave. Jessica blew on her nails, a cold look in her eyes. I'm thinking about it. My sister in Chicago says I can stay with her. At least she has heating that works. You can't leave, Agnes said, her voice rising. You're carrying my grandson, the Vance heir. Jessica looked at her stomach, then back at Agnes. She let out a short, mirthless laugh. About that. Mark froze. About what? Jessica stood up, capping the nail polish. I went to the doctor yesterday. The stress, the walking in the rain. It wasn't good for me, Mark. Is the baby okay? Mark asked, a flicker of genuine concern in his eyes. It was the only thing he had left. The legacy he had destroyed his marriage for. There is no baby, Mark, Jessica said flatly. Mark stood up. What did you lose it? Jessica sighed, picking up her purse. I was never pregnant, Mark. I was late. I took a test. It was inconclusive, but I saw how desperate you were for an excuse to leave Elara. I figured, why not secure the bag? I thought you were going to be CEO. I thought you had money. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the sound of the leaky faucet seemed to stop. You lied, Agnes whispered, clutching her chest. You destroyed my family. For a lie. I didn't destroy anything, Jessica spat. Mark destroyed it. He's the one who cheated. He's the one who stole money. I was just along for the ride. And now that the ride is over, so am I. Jessica walked to the door. Jessica, wait. Mark lunged for her, but he tripped over a pile of unpaid bills on the floor. "Goodbye, Mark," Jessica said. "Don't call me. I'm blocking your number." The door slammed. Mark lay on the floor among the envelopes, stamped "Final Notice." He looked up at his mother. Agnes looked back at him with pure disgust. "You are not the son I raised," Agnes said icily. "You are a fool." Mark put his head down on the dirty carpet and wept. He thought of Elara. He thought of the warm roast dinners, the clean house, the quiet support she had given him for 5 years. He realized with a sickening jolt that he hadn't just lost $1 billion. He had lost the only person who had ever actually loved him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Elara stood in the foyer of the Vance estate. It was empty. The furniture had been auctioned off to pay the creditors. The house felt hollow. "Are you sure you want to do this, Ms. Sterling?" Arthur asked, standing behind her with a clipboard. "You have penthouses, villas in Tuscany, and a chalet in Aspen. Why buy this place? It holds bad memories." Elara walked to the kitchen. She ran her hand over the marble counter where she had been standing when Agnes called her a parasite. "I'm not going to live here." "Arthur," Elara said, "I'm buying it to repurpose it." "Repurpose it?" "I'm turning it into a shelter," Elara said, turning to him with a smile. "Specifically for women who have been displaced by domestic crises, women who were thrown out with nothing. They will come here and they will be fed, clothed, and trained for high-paying jobs." Arthur smiled, a rare expression for the stoic lawyer. A fitting revenge, using the Vance family home to empower the very women the Vance family despised. "Exactly," Elara said. "Burn the furniture, repaint the walls. I want every trace of them gone by Monday." 6 months later, Elara Sterling was no longer just a headline. She was a force of nature. Under her leadership, Harrington Global had expanded its green energy initiatives and streamlined its logistics. The stock price was up 15%. But heavy is the head that wears the crown. Elara sat in her office on the 40th floor, looking at a dossier Arthur had placed on her desk. The name on the file was Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne was a corporate raider, a billionaire in his own right, known for buying struggling companies, stripping them of their assets, and selling the scraps. He was ruthless, misogynistic, and currently he was gunning for Elara. "He's acquired 12% of Harrington Global through shell companies," Arthur warned, pacing the room. "He's calling for a hostile takeover. He thinks you're weak, Elara. He's been telling the press that you're a lucky housewife playing dress-up, and that the company needs a strong male hand to guide it." Elara took a sip of her espresso. "Let him talk. What's his next move?" "He's called for a public debate at the Economic Forum tomorrow," Arthur said. "He wants to humiliate you in front of the major shareholders. He's going to quiz you on complex fiscal policies, supply chain macroeconomics. He wants to prove you don't know what you're doing. And if I refuse, then the shareholders might get spooked and sell to him. Thorne has a reputation for being right about weak leadership." Elara stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the city skyline. She remembered how small she felt 6 months ago. She remembered Mark telling her she had no ambition. "Accept the invitation," Elara said. "Elara, are you sure?" Arthur looked worried. "Thorne is a shark. He eats CEOs for breakfast. He has 30 years of experience." "He has 30 years of experience bullying people," Elara corrected. "He relies on intimidation. He relies on people being afraid to look stupid. I spent 5 years living with a man who made me feel stupid every day. I'm immune to it, Arthur." The Economic Forum was televised globally. The stage was set with 2 podiums. On the left stood Julian Thorne, a large man with a booming voice and a predatory grin. On the right stood Elara Sterling, wearing a sharp white suit, looking calm and collected. The moderator opened the floor. Thorne didn't wait for a question. He attacked immediately. "Ms. Sterling," Thorne boomed, leaning into his microphone. "Let's be honest. You inherited a Ferrari, but you don't know how to drive. You're keeping the seat warm. My question is simple. Can you explain the impact of the inverted yield curve on your Q3 logistics projections for the Southeast Asian sector, specifically regarding the tariff fluctuations in Vietnam?" It was a trap, a jargon-heavy question designed to make her stutter. The audience held its breath. Elara didn't blink. She adjusted her microphone. "That's an interesting question, Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice steady. "But it's also a fundamentally flawed one. The inverted yield curve affects long-term debt structuring, not quarterly logistics projections. Furthermore, the tariffs you mentioned were repealed 3 weeks ago in the new trade agreement, something you would know if you read the trade reports instead of just the headlines." Thorne's smile faltered. "However," Elara continued, stepping out from behind the podium, "since we are talking about driving the Ferrari, let's talk about your company, Thorne Industries. You're currently leveraged at 400% debt to equity. You're trying to acquire Harrington Global, not because you think I'm weak, but because you are desperate for our cash reserves to pay off your own loans." The crowd murmured. Thorne's face turned red. "That's preposterous," Thorne sputtered. "I am a titan of industry." "You are a gambler on a losing streak," Elara said, pulling a remote from her pocket. The screen behind them changed. It showed a graph of Thorne's declining assets. "I did some reading too," Elara said, addressing the camera. "And this morning Harrington Global purchased the debt notes for Thorne Industries from your primary lenders. Technically, Mr. Thorne, I own your debt, which means I own you." Thorne froze. He looked at the screen. The numbers were accurate. You bought my debt," he whispered. "I learned a valuable lesson recently," Elara said, her voice hard. "When someone tries to throw you out of your own house, you don't just lock the door. You buy the block." She turned to the moderator. "I believe this debate is over. Mr. Thorne has a bankruptcy meeting to attend." Elara walked off the stage to thunderous applause. She hadn't just survived. She had dominated. She had proven to the world and to herself that she wasn't just a wife. She wasn't just an heiress. She was a leader. As she walked backstage, Arthur was waiting with a bottle of champagne. "Brilliant," Arthur said, beaming. "Absolutely brilliant. Silas would be dancing." "It's not over," Elara said, taking a glass but not drinking yet. "Thorne was just a bully. But it made me realize something." "What's that?" "I've been reacting. First to Mark, then to Thorne. It's time I start building something of my own. Something that isn't just about money." Her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Elara hesitated, then answered. "Hello." "Elara." The voice was cracked, broken and desperate. It was Mark. Elara sighed. "Mark, I told you not to call." "I know," Mark rasped. I saw the debate on a TV in a shop window. You were amazing." "Thank you," Elara said politely. "Elara, I'm sleeping in a shelter," Mark said, his voice breaking. "My mother had a stroke from the stress. She's in the county hospital. We have nothing. Please, I don't want money. Just forgiveness. I need to know you don't hate me." Elara stood in the quiet backstage corridor. She thought about the anger that had fueled her for months. She realized it was gone. She didn't hate Mark. She pitied him. He was a small man who had made small choices. "I don't hate you, Mark," Elara said softly. "I don't feel anything for you at all. You're a stranger to me." "Please, Elara." "I opened a shelter at the old estate," Elara said. "It's for women, but they have a program for families in crisis nearby. Go there, get help, get a job, start over. But do it on your own." She hung up the phone. "Everything all right?" Arthur asked. "Yes," Elara said, handing him the champagne glass. "The past is finally closed. Now let's go celebrate." 1 year later, the morning sun over Manhattan didn't just shine. It seemed to sparkle. Elara Sterling stood on the balcony of her new residence, a brownstone in the West Village that she had restored. It was cozy, filled with books and art, a far cry from the cold, sterile museum that was the Vance estate. Today was the opening of the Sterling Foundation's newest wing at the City Hospital. "Coffee black, 2 sugars, just the way you like it." Elara turned around. Leaning against the doorframe was Liam Ford. Liam wasn't a billionaire tycoon or a corporate shark. He was the head architect who had designed her women's shelters. He had messy brown hair, calloused hands from working on site, and a smile that reached his eyes. They had met 8 months ago. Elara had been inspecting the construction of the shelter at the old Vance estate. She was wearing a hard hat and pointing out a flaw in the structural beams. Most men would have been intimidated by the billionaire heiress, telling them their math was off. Liam had just laughed, handed her a marker and said, "You're right. Show me how you'd fix it." He didn't want a servant. He wanted a partner. "Thank you," Elara said, taking the mug. She leaned into him, and he wrapped a strong arm around her waist. "Nervous about the speech?" Liam asked. "A little," Elara admitted. "It's been a year since, everything changed. Sometimes I still wake up expecting to be back in that cold house, waiting for Mark to come home and criticize the laundry." Liam kissed the top of her head. "You're not that person anymore, Elara. You saved yourself. The money just gave you the exit. You did the walking." 5 miles away, the lunch rush was starting at Sal's Diner. It was a greasy spoon joint, the kind of place where the air smelled permanently of frying oil and onions. "Order up table 4 needs ketchup," the cook yelled. "I'm going. I'm going," a man mumbled, grabbing the bottle. Mark Vance wiped his brow with a stained rag. He was wearing a polyester uniform that was a size too small. His shoes were worn out. He looked older than his 35 years. The arrogance that used to define his face had been replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. He walked to table 4. A young couple was sitting there. The man was on his phone, ignoring the woman. "Here's your ketchup," Mark said, placing the bottle down. "Took you long enough," the man at the table snapped, not looking up. "And this coffee is cold. Take it back." Mark stiffened. The old Mark would have exploded. The old Mark would have demanded to speak to a manager, ignoring that he was the waiter. But the new Mark just took a breath. "I'm sorry, sir," Mark said quietly. "I'll brew a fresh pot right away." As he walked back to the kitchen, he caught a glimpse of the TV mounted in the corner. It was tuned to the local news. "And here is Elara Sterling, billionaire philanthropist, cutting the ribbon on the new pediatric wing." Mark stopped. He stared at the screen. Elara looked radiant. She was laughing at something the man next to her, a tall, rugged architect, had whispered. She looked free. She looked beautiful. "Hey, Vance, stop daydreaming and wash those dishes," his boss shouted. Mark looked at the screen one last time. He remembered the anniversary dinner. He remembered throwing her out in the rain. He remembered telling her she was worthless. He realized now, holding a tray of dirty dishes, that he had been the parasite. He had drained her of her joy to fill the void in himself. "She looks happy," Mark whispered to himself. A strange sensation filled his chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was regret, heavy and permanent. He turned away from the screen and went back to the sink. This was his life now, and for the first time he accepted that he deserved it. That evening, Elara took the stage at the hospital. The room was packed with the city's elite, but she didn't care about impressing them anymore. She looked for only one face in the crowd. Liam gave her a thumbs up from the front row. "Thank you all for coming." Elara began, her voice ringing clear without a tremor. "A year ago, I was standing in the rain with a garbage bag of clothes and $10 in my pocket. I was told I had no value. I was told I was a bad investment." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "We often let others define our worth," she continued. "We let spouses, parents, or bosses tell us who we are. But wealth isn't just about the billions in the bank, though I admit it helps," she joked, drawing a laugh from the crowd. "True wealth is the ability to walk away from what hurts you. It's the power to rebuild. I inherited a fortune, yes, but the woman who built this foundation, I had to forge her in the fire." She raised her glass. "To second chances, and to knowing that when one door slams in your face, you have the power to buy the building and knock down the walls." The applause was deafening. Elara walked off the stage and into Liam's arms. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Not yet." Elara smiled, pulling him toward the dance floor. "I think I'd like to dance. I never got to dance at my wedding." "Well," Liam said, spinning her around as the music started. "Then let's make up for lost time." As they swayed to the music, Elara rested her head on his shoulder. She didn't think about Mark. She didn't think about the money. She thought about the future, a future that was entirely, wonderfully her own. The rain that had washed her out of her old life had finally stopped, and the view from the other side was magnificent. And that is the incredible story of Elara Sterling, from being kicked out on her anniversary to becoming the billionaire boss who bought her ex-husband's debt. It's a powerful reminder that no matter how low you feel or how badly people treat you, your value does not decrease based on someone else's inability to see your worth. Karma has a way of finding everyone. Mark found his in a diner kitchen, and Elara found hers in true freedom. What did you think of Mark's punishment? Did he deserve worse, or was a life of regret enough? And would you have forgiven him if you were Elara? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, revenge, and sweet justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a crazy drama coming up next week about a runaway bride and a secret lottery ticket that you won't want to miss. Thanks for listening, and remember, the best revenge is massive success.